The clock on the wall ticked softly, each second stretching into the still air of the classroom. Asha Daniels sat in the third row, her back straight, her pencil moving in a steady rhythm. The AP Calculus final lay before her, pages thick with numbers and symbols that made most students' heads ache. But for Asha, it was a language she knew by heart. She didn't rush. She didn't fidget. She worked with the calm precision of someone who had prepared for this moment all year. Around her, students sighed, erased, started over. The air carried that faint mix of pencil shavings and nervous energy, but in Asha's mind it was quiet. She reached the last problem, read it once and smiled just slightly. It wasn't arrogance, just the satisfaction of recognizing an old friend. A few careful lines of work, one final check, and she closed her booklet. She stood, walked to the front, and placed it gently on Mr. Whitmore's desk. He looked up, surprised. "Done already?" "Yes, sir." Her voice was soft but sure. His eyebrows lifted, almost skeptically, but he said nothing. She walked back to her seat, opened her notebook, and began to doodle, waiting for the period to end. When the bell finally rang, students spilled out into the hallway, some groaning, others laughing in relief. Asha blended into the crowd, her steps light, her mind already on lunch. She didn't think about the test again until the grades came out. The results were posted online the next morning. Asha clicked through absent-mindedly, expecting another high score. But when she saw the number, she froze. 104%. Extra credit had pushed her over the edge. It wasn't just the highest in the class, it was the highest score in the school's history. Her phone buzzed with congratulatory texts from friends, but before she could reply, an announcement crackled over the intercom. "Asha Daniels, please report to the principal's office." She felt a ripple of curiosity around her as she stood. The walk down the hall seemed longer than usual. Inside the office, Principal Hale sat at his desk, and beside him stood Mr. Whitmore, arms crossed. The principal gestured to a chair. "Asha, have a seat." Mr. Whitmore leaned forward slightly. "Your exam results, they're extraordinary, almost too extraordinary." His voice was calm, but there was an edge beneath it. Asha blinked. "I studied for months." "I'm sure you did," he said. "But based on the timing, the difficulty of the questions, and certain similarities to the answer key, I have reason to believe you cheated." The words hit like a physical blow. Her mouth went dry. "That's not true." The principal's tone was measured. "We'll be conducting a formal review." Asha sat very still. On the outside, her face was unerratable. Inside, something sharp and cold began to take shape. A quiet determination she would carry into the storm that was coming. The next morning, the classroom buzzed with the usual pre-period chatter. Backpacks dropped to the floor. Pencils tapped against desks, and someone laughed loudly in the back. Asha slipped into her seat near the window, the morning light falling across her notebook. She was ready to take notes, ready to pretend nothing was happening outside of her studies. Mr. Whitmore walked in right on the bell. He didn't start with the day's lesson. Instead, he set his leather briefcase on the desk, clasped his hands and scanned the room. His eyes stopped on Asha. "Class," he said evenly. "Before we begin, I'd like to address something important." The room quieted. As you all know, our AP Calculus exam scores were posted yesterday. Most of you performed as expected. But there was one result that stood out. He took a slow step forward. Asha Daniels scored a record-breaking 104%. Quite the achievement, wouldn't you say? A few students murmured. Someone in the back gave a low whistle. Mr. Whitmore tilted his head, his gaze fixed on her. Remarkable. Almost unbelievable. Asha felt every eye turn toward her. She kept her hands folded on her desk. "I studied," she said quietly. "Oh, I'm sure you did," he replied, the faintest trace of a smile on his lips. But when a student's performance exceeds every statistical expectation, especially on a test of this difficulty, it raises questions. Questions about whether the work was entirely their own. A ripple went through the room. Phones slid out of pockets. Someone in the corner angled their camera toward the front. "I don't cheat," Asha said, her voice steady. He stepped closer, resting one hand on the edge of her desk. "You finished early. You scored higher than any student in this school's history. And by a curious coincidence, your answers match the key exactly. All of them." A couple of students exchanged glances. The air felt heavy. She looked up at him, meeting his eyes. Maybe that's because I got them all right. His expression barely shifted, but there was a flicker, something like irritation. I would expect such confidence if it were warranted. But extraordinary claims require extraordinary proof. The silence was thick now. Only the faint hum of the overhead lights filled the space. Asha didn't move. She didn't look away. After a long pause, Mr. Whitmore straightened. We'll see what the investigation reveals. In the meantime, let this be a reminder to everyone, integrity matters as much as skill. He turned back to the board and began writing the day's topic. Conversations remained hushed, glances darting toward Asha. She opened her notebook, her pen gliding across the page. Her face gave nothing away, but in that stillness, she held a power he hadn't anticipated, one that would grow in the days to come. By lunchtime, the story had already traveled farther than Asha could have imagined. The AP Calculus confrontation wasn't just a private embarrassment anymore. It had become the day's main event. In the cafeteria line, two sophomores whispered behind their hands, shooting glances her way. At a nearby table, a senior shook his head and muttered, "No one finishes that test in under an hour." She had to have seen the answers. But not everyone bought it. In the corner, her friend Layla defended her with quiet fury. "You've known Asha since freshman year. When has she ever cheated? She's been tutoring half the math team for free." The words cheater and genius floated through the air like two different songs playing at once. Neither seemed to cancel the other out. As Asha walked through the halls, conversations hushed for half a second, then picked back up as soon as she passed. Some stares were curious, others skeptical. A few were openly hostile. Her phone vibrated with notifications, tags, messages, and a string of links. She tapped one. A shaky, vertical video filled the screen. Mr. Whitmore standing over her desk, his voice calm but loaded with accusation. The clip cut off just as she looked up at him. Comments scrolled below. "She looks guilty." Or maybe she's just done with his nonsense. Bet this goes viral. By the next hallway, she spotted a group of juniors huddled together, watching the same clip. One of them turned their phone slightly so she could see. She didn't flinch. She just kept walking. At her locker, a folded piece of paper stuck out from the slats. She pulled it free and read the single word scrawled in marker. Fake. She folded it neatly in half, slid it into her bag, and shut the locker door with a quiet click. All around her, the rumor machine spun faster. Teachers in the lounge whispered about integrity and precedent. A boy on the basketball team posted a meme with her face photoshopped onto a detective board, strings connecting her to test papers. Still, Asha's steps never quickened. Her gaze never dropped. She knew the temptation would be to lash out, to shout her innocence in every direction. But that wasn't her way. She was already thinking ahead. Past the noise, past the stairs, past the week itself. Every hallway she walked that day felt like a gauntlet, but she carried herself the same way she had during the exam, steady, precise, and unshaken. People would remember that long after the whispers faded. And if Miss Whitmore thought this was the end of the story, he was about to learn this was just the first chapter she intended to write. The envelope was plain white, the kind the school used for attendance notices and fundraising flyers. It sat on the kitchen table when Asha got home, her name typed neatly in the center. Her mother's lips were pressed into a thin line. "It came today," she said, sliding it toward her. Asha sat down, broke the seal, and unfolded the single sheet. Her eyes skimmed the words, "Formal review. Allegations of academic dishonesty. Temporarily suspended from extracurricular activities. Math team membership revoked. Ineligible for national competition." Her stomach dropped. She read it again, slower this time. The letter was signed by Principal Hale, his signature looping neatly under the school crest. Her father came in from the back room, still in his work uniform, the smell of engine oil clinging to him. "What's going on?" Asha handed him the paper. He read silently, jaw tightening. "They're out of their minds," he muttered. "You've been studying for this competition for months." Her mother crossed her arms. "Years. She's been building toward this for years." The three of them sat in the small kitchen, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. Outside, a car door slammed, and a neighbor's laughter drifted in. Inside, it felt like the air had thickened. "This affects your scholarships," her mother finally said. "If they put this on your record—" "They won't," Asha said quietly. Her father looked at her. You sound awfully sure. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she refolded the letter, pressed the crease flat with her thumb, and set it back on the table. After dinner, she retreated to her room. The desk lamp lit the corner where her textbooks were stacked in neat piles. She sat down, the letter beside her, and tapped her pen against the wood in a slow, steady rhythm. She could hear the faint hum of the TV in the living room, her parents speaking in low voices. She opened her notebook, not to do homework, but to sketch out ideas. Dates, names, step. They thought this was about one exam. They thought she would either break under the weight of the accusation or fade quietly into the background. But they didn't understand her. Asha had always believed in preparation, not just for tests, but for life. And if they wanted proof, she would give them something so undeniable, so public, that the same people whispering cheater would have no choice but to say her name with respect. She capped her pen, set it down, and looked at the letter one last time. In the silence of her room, the decision was made. The next move would be hers. The library was never crowded after school, but that week it became Asha's second home. She claimed a table near the back, far from the windows, where the afternoon light softened into gold. A fortress of textbooks rose around her. Calculus, linear algebra, number theory, pages bristling with sticky notes. Every day, at exactly 3:15, she unpacked her notebook, sharpened her pencils, and began. No music, no phone, just the steady scratch of graphite on paper, the quiet rustle of turning pages, and the occasional click of her mechanical pencil resetting. She didn't speak to anyone. Not to the students who passed by. Not to the librarian who slid returned books back onto shelves. Not even to friends who hovered uncertainly at the edge of her table. When Layla stopped by one afternoon and asked if she wanted to grab coffee, Asha simply shook her head and returned to her work. The rumors outside the library walls didn't slow. In fact, they seemed to grow louder in her absence. Screens lit up with new theories, memes, and side-by-side images of her and the answer key circulated without context. But inside the library, the air felt different. Quieter. Sharper. By Wednesday, a few students had started lingering nearby under the pretense of studying. From their tables, they watched as Asha filled line after line with equations, barely pausing to think. Her hand moved quickly, but never sloppily. Every number, every symbol landed exactly where it needed to. Is she doing triple integrals? One whispered to another, both peering over their laptops. Yeah, and I think she's doing them in her head first. They weren't wrong. Asha worked as though the problems were puzzles she'd already solved in some other life. She didn't skip steps, but she never hesitated. When she finished one problem, she slid seamlessly into the next, like a musician moving from one song to another without breaking rhythm. Even the librarian began to notice. Mrs. Carter, a woman who had seen decades of distracted teenagers, found herself pausing behind Asha's chair, eyes scanning the densely packed solutions. She said nothing, just nodded slightly before moving on. By Friday, there was a quiet buzz in the library whenever Asha walked in. No one dared speak to her directly, but more and more students found excuses to study nearby. A few recorded short, shaky clips from their phones, quick pans over her table, the towering stack of books, the pages filled with complex calculations. The videos didn't go viral, but they began circulating quietly, gathering their own momentum. Asha ignored the watching eyes, the hushed exchanges. She wasn't here to prove anything to them, not yet. This was preparation, plain and simple. She knew what she was building toward, even if they didn't. And if they thought the silence meant she was retreating, they were wrong. The silence was her wind-up. The throw was still to come. The conference room smelled faintly of coffee and copier paper. A rectangular table filled most of the space, its polished surface reflecting the overhead lights. Asha sat between her parents, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Across from them sat Principal Hale, posture straight, and Mr. Whitmore, his expression neutral but his eyes sharp. Her mother spoke first. We've read the letter. We've heard the rumors. What we haven't heard is any real evidence that our daughter cheated. Mr. Whitmore clasped his hands on the table. Mrs. Daniels, I understand your concern, but in my 20 years of teaching, I've never seen a performance like this. A perfect score, finished in record time. It's statistically improbable. Her father leaned forward. Statistically improbable isn't the same as impossible. You're punishing her for being better than you expected. It's not about expectations, Whitmore replied evenly. It's about maintaining academic integrity. If I ignore anomalies, I'm failing my duty to all my students. Principal Hale cleared his throat. We're not here to assume guilt or innocence. We're here to ensure the process is fair. The review will determine the outcome. Her mother's voice tightened. In the meantime, you've pulled her from the math team and stripped her from the national competition she's worked toward for years. That's not neutral. That's punishment. Whitmore's gaze flicked toward Asha. If her performance was genuine, she has nothing to fear from the review. Asha had been silent until now, her eyes moving between them, watching the exchange like a chess match. Finally, she straightened in her chair. Then let's make it simple, she said softly. The room stilled. I'll take another test, she continued. Harder than the first. You can bring in someone from outside the school to write it. Set up cameras. Have as many teachers watch as you want. No phones, no breaks, no excuses. If I pass, we end this. Her father turned to her in surprise. Her mother's eyebrows lifted. Whitmore's expression didn't change, but something in his jaw tightened. That's unusual, he said slowly. Unusual, Asha replied, isn't the same as impossible. Principal Hale leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. It's not a decision we can make on the spot. We'll consider it. Asha nodded once, as if satisfied. You should. And you should decide quickly. No one spoke for a moment. The hum of the ceiling vent filled the gap. Whitmore glanced at the principal, but Hale kept his gaze on Asha, as though trying to read what she wasn't saying. What none of them realized was that she'd already mapped the next several moves in her mind. This wasn't desperation. It was strategy. She wasn't just agreeing to their challenge. She was building the stage on which she planned to win. The email arrived 2 days later, formal and clipped. The school has decided to proceed with a retest. The details were outlined with precision. The exam would be written by an external examiner, tailored to be significantly more difficult than the AP final. It would be proctored under full camera surveillance. At least 3 faculty members would be present, along with the principal. They didn't say it outright, but the subtext was obvious. This wasn't meant to clear her name, it was meant to prove, once and for all, that she couldn't do what she claimed. A printed copy awaited Asha in the main office, complete with a line at the bottom for her signature. The secretary slid it across the counter, her expression unreadable. You'll need to sign before the end of the day. Asha read every word, not rushing. Her eyes moved over phrases like ensure academic integrity and verification of performance. When she reached the signature line, she didn't hesitate. She picked up the pen, signed her name in steady strokes, and slid the paper back. Within hours, the news was everywhere. Screens lit up with posts. She's really doing it. This is going to be a disaster. Or the biggest flex in school history. Someone started a countdown clock online. A few TikTok edits mashed clips of her confrontation with suspenseful music. By the next morning, the retest had become more than just a school event. It was a spectacle. The rumor was that even a local reporter was coming. Teachers whispered in the lounge, speculating about the outcome. Some looked forward to her humiliation. Others, though they wouldn't admit it aloud, hoped she'd pull it off. Layla found her at her locker. You sure about this? Asha's voice was calm. More sure than they are. Every step of the agreement played into her plan. The cameras, the faculty witnesses, the external examiner. They were supposed to be traps, but to her, they were safeguards. The more eyes on her, the cleaner the win would be. She spent the next 2 days in the library again, not just studying, but refining. She wasn't preparing to scrape by. She was preparing to make it look effortless. When the day came, she would be ready. And when the results came out, there would be no room for statistically improbable. There would only be proof. The gym didn't look like a gym anymore. The basketball hoops were raised. The bleachers pushed back. In the center of the polished floor sat a single desk, small and bare, facing rows of folding chairs. Teachers filed in first, taking their seats in the back. A few students slipped through the doors, clutching their phones. Sure enough, a man with a press badge stood off to the side, adjusting his camera tripod. Principal Hale stepped up to a small podium. Today is about integrity, he said, his voice echoing slightly in the cavernous room. About ensuring that excellence is earned, and recognized when it is. Asha walked in without looking at the crowd. She wore a plain sweater, her hair tied back, and carried nothing but 2 sharpened pencils. She sat at the desk, adjusted her chair and folded her hands while the examiner placed the test face down in front of her. "Begin," the examiner said. She flipped the paper and started writing immediately. Her pencil moved in clean, deliberate strokes. She paused only to check a step, then kept going. The scratching sound carried through the silence. Every so often, she turned a page. Each crisp flip seemed to echo off the walls. The audience shifted in their seats, leaning forward. Even the reporter stopped fiddling with his camera, watching her instead. She didn't look up once. The clock above the bleachers ticked steadily, the second hand slicing through the silence. 30 minutes had passed since the examiner's signal to begin. Most of the audience knew the test was supposed to take at least an hour, if it could be finished at all. Asha's pencil slowed, then stopped. She placed it neatly beside the paper, folded her hands and looked straight ahead. She didn't fidget. She didn't check her phone, there was none to check. She simply sat as still as stone. It took a moment for anyone to notice. Then a soft murmur spread through the rows of chairs. "Is she done?" A student whispered. "No way," someone else muttered. The examiner, a graying man in a navy suit, looked up sharply. "You've finished?" "Yes," Asha said. Her tone was calm, as if she'd just answered a roll call. He approached the desk, picked up her paper, and began flipping through the pages. His eyes moved quickly at first, then slowed. A slight furrow formed between his brows. By the 4th page, he stopped entirely, staring at her work. Without a word, he crossed the gym to where 2 other faculty members sat observing. He handed them the paper and bent down, speaking in a low voice. Their heads tilted toward the pages. One of them, a younger math teacher, glanced toward Asha, then back at the test. The other, a woman with decades of teaching experience, adjusted her glasses and began pointing at individual steps on the page. From the back row, the shifting and whispering grew louder. Students leaned over to see what was happening. The reporter's camera caught the huddle of teachers bent over the paper. Their expressions caught somewhere between skepticism and awe. Mr. Whitmore, sitting 2 rows behind the principal, kept his face carefully neutral. Only his tightened grip on the arm of his chair betrayed any reaction. The examiner straightened and walked back to the front, but he didn't return the paper to Asha. Instead, he set it on his own table, closed his folder over it, and turned to the principal. The 2 men exchanged a quiet exchange of words no one could hear. Asha remained unmoved. She didn't glance at the clock, didn't track their movements. She kept her posture the same, back straight, hands folded, eyes forward. To the audience, it looked like waiting, but to her, it was part of the demonstration. Every second she sat in calm silence only added to the weight of what was about to come. The rest of the allotted time stretched ahead like an open road. The other students in the crowd began to realize they weren't watching a test anymore. They were watching the beginning of something much bigger. The last minute on the clock ticked away, though Asha had been finished for what felt like a lifetime. When the bell rang, the examiner rose from his seat at the side table, holding her paper in both hands. The room fell instantly quiet. Principal Hale stood. "We'll now review the results." The examiner cleared his throat, cutting him off. "No need, I've already reviewed them." He turned toward the crowd. "On this test, one deliberately constructed to be more challenging than the AP Calculus final, Miss Daniels has scored a perfect 100%. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. Then the sound hit gasps, murmurs, a few incredulous laughs. A girl in the second row clapped a hand over her mouth. The younger math teacher whispered, "Impossible." But the older woman beside him shook her head slowly, eyes fixed on Asha. From somewhere in the middle rows, a voice called out, "Wait, seriously." Phones were already up, recording every angle. One student near the front had been live streaming since she walked in. The chat on his screen exploded in a flood of comments and emojis. The examiner continued, his voice steady. Every solution correct. Every method valid. And in several cases she used approaches I would expect from advanced undergraduates, not high school students. The words hung in the air. A few seats back, Mr. Whitmore's lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. Asha didn't move. She didn't smile, didn't bow her head. She simply looked at the examiner, gave a single nod, and returned her gaze forward. But the audience couldn't contain itself. Students began whispering to each other, leaning across aisles. "Did you see how fast she finished? She made it look easy." Mr. Whitmore's dead in the water. The live stream caught the examiner's next words clearly. Let this stand as confirmation that Miss Daniels's original performance was both genuine and exceptional. The clip, 34 seconds long, would be reposted thousands of times before the day was over. In one frame you could see Asha sitting motionless at her desk while the words washed over her. In another you could see the principal's faint, uncomfortable shift in his stance. By the time the crowd began to leave, the moment had already escaped the walls of the gym. It was in group chats, on Twitter, on TikTok, traveling faster than anyone could control. And for the first time since the accusation, the word people whispered in the hallway wasn't cheater, it was legend. By the time the sun dipped behind the rooftops, the clip from the gym had already crossed 1 million views. It wasn't just local students sharing it anymore, it was strangers from other states, then other countries, stitching reactions, adding captions, breaking down the moment frame by frame. The hashtags came next. Let her learn. Apologize to Asha. Quiet power. They trended by nightfall. Celebrities with millions of followers reposted the clip, some adding a single word, respect. On the school's official social media pages, the comments poured in faster than moderators could delete them. You owe her an apology. This is what systemic bias looks like. Do better. But it wasn't just strangers. Alumni began chiming in, some with stories from decades past. When I was a student here, they pulled me from an honors class for reviewing my placement. Never gave me an explanation, one wrote. Another described being accused of plagiarism for an essay she'd spent weeks crafting. The school's glossy image proudly displayed on its website and in recruiting brochures began to fray. Every repost of Asha's calm, unflinching face sitting in that gym was another stitch pulled loose. Even local news picked it up, leading with, "Small-town student under scrutiny proves herself under impossible conditions." The reporter who had been in the gym was suddenly in demand, giving interviews about the atmosphere that day. The audible gasps when the score was read. In group chats, students shared screenshots of teachers' reactions. One message thread caught fire. A blurry photo of Mr. Whitmore leaving the building, head down, captioned simply, "Not smiling now." By midnight, the narrative had shifted completely. It wasn't about whether Asha had cheated. It was about how quickly people had assumed she had. And now the whole country was watching. The next morning a statement appeared on the school's website, attributed to Mr. Whitmore. It was short and formal. My decision to request a review of Miss Daniels's exam results was procedural and not personal. As an educator, it is my duty to ensure academic integrity for all students. I regret that this process has caused distress, but I stand by the importance of verification in extraordinary cases. Some might have let it end there. But the internet doesn't let things end neatly. That afternoon, screenshots began circulating. Emails, allegedly sent from Mr. Whitmore to another staff member before the retest was approved. In one he wrote, "I just don't see how a student like her could have pulled that off without help." The words "a student like her" lit a match under the conversation. Within minutes people were dissecting the phrase. Comment sections swelled with anger. "What exactly does that mean, Mr. Whitmore? We know what it means. Say it louder for the people in the back. This is about race." National outlets picked up the story. A panel of commentators discussed the coded language, often used to question the achievements of students from marginalized backgrounds. One called it textbook bias, pun intended. The hashtags evolved. "Student like her" began trending, repurposed as a rallying cry. People posted their own accomplishments under the tag graduation photos, trophies, acceptance letters with captions like, "For every time they doubted me." The school, already reeling from the first wave of backlash, now faced a second, sharper one. And Mr. Whitmore's calm procedural mask was starting to crack under the weight of it. By Friday night, the school board meeting was standing room only. Parents, students, alumni, and activists packed into the multi-purpose room, the air thick with anticipation. Handwritten signs leaned against the back wall. "Let her learn, end the bias, accountability now." The board members sat at a long table up front, shuffling papers, avoiding direct eye contact with the crowd. The first speaker was Lila. She spoke steadily about Asha's years of academic excellence, the hours she'd spent tutoring classmates, the competitions she'd won. "If this is how you treat your brightest students," she said, "what hope is there for the rest of us?" Next came an alumnus who had flown in from out of state. He told of being steered away from AP classes despite high grades. "I didn't have the proof Asha has," he said, "but I live the same doubt." One by one, voices filled the room. Parents furious at the damage done to a child's reputation. Students listing microaggressions they'd endured. Community leaders citing national statistics on disciplinary disparities. By the time the 10th speaker finished, the board members had shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Their polite smiles were gone, replaced by the tight expressions of people realizing the tide had turned against them. In the back, Asha sat quietly, her hands folded, her gaze steady on the table at the front. She didn't need to speak, not yet. The room was speaking for her, and every word made it harder for the board to pretend this was just an isolated incident. When his turn finally came, Mr. Whitmore rose from his seat at the end of the board's long table. He gripped the microphone with both hands, pausing as if the silence would lend him weight. "This," he began, "has gotten out of hand. I have been subjected to personal attacks, online harassment, and the destruction of my professional reputation. All because I followed standard procedure." He let the words hang, scanning the room. What we're seeing here is the danger of a mob mentality. What some might call cancel culture. A few murmurs rippled through the audience. Someone in the back snorted quietly. Whitmore pressed on. "This was never about race or bias. It was about doing my job. Any teacher who cares about academic integrity would have done the same." He stepped back, handing the microphone to the board chair. That was when Asha's mother leaned toward her. "You don't have to," she whispered, but Asha was already standing. When she reached the podium, she didn't touch the microphone right away. She let the room settle, the shuffling and whispers fading to stillness. Then in a voice clear but quiet, she began. "I'd like to walk you through exactly what happened." She outlined the timeline, her months of preparation, the test itself, the moment she was called to the principal's office. She described the public accusation in front of her classmates, the whispers in the hallway, the letter that stripped her of opportunities she had worked toward for years. "I sat in the library every day while people speculated about me online," she said. "I took a test designed to prove I couldn't possibly succeed. I finished it in half the time. And even then, some people refused to believe it." Her eyes swept the room. "It's not just about me. It's about every student who's been told they don't belong in a class, or that their success must be a mistake. I'm here because I had the chance to prove myself publicly. Not everyone gets that chance." When she stepped back, the silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was charged. People weren't breathing just to hear the next move. Even the board members looked momentarily at a loss for words. It was clear to everyone in the room. Whitmore's narrative had just collapsed, and Asha hadn't raised her voice once. The board recessed for deliberation, filing out through a side door while the audience hummed with speculation. 30 minutes later, they returned, their expressions more sober than when they'd left. The chair cleared her throat. "The board has reached a decision." She read from a prepared statement. "Effective immediately, Miss Asha Daniels' academic record is fully reinstated. The board extends a public apology for the handling of this matter and will commission an independent investigation into potential discriminatory practices within the district." A collective exhale swept the room. Additionally, she continued, "Mr. Whitmore will be placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of this investigation." A single clap rang out, then another, until the room erupted in applause. Students rose from their seats. Parents stood and cheered. Someone shouted, "Justice!" Cameras flashed, catching the moment Asha's mother squeezed her hand and her father nodded with quiet pride. Asha remained composed, giving a small nod in acknowledgement. It wasn't triumph she felt, it was relief, and a quiet certainty that this was only one battle in a much larger fight. When the meeting adjourned, the crowd outside was even larger than the one inside. Supporters pressed against the rope line, chanting her name. News vans idled at the curb, their satellite dishes aimed skyward. Reporters called out questions over the noise. As she stepped through the doors, a rush of flashes met her. Layla appeared at her side, beaming. "You did it," she said. Asha glanced at her, then at the crowd. "We did it," she replied. The chants grew louder. Somewhere in the distance a car horn blared in solidarity. She made her way to the small podium set up outside for the press, knowing the next part of the fight was about to begin. The microphone wobbled slightly as Asha adjusted it. Behind her, her parents stood shoulder to shoulder, their presence steadying her. The noise from the crowd dulled as she began to speak. I want to thank everyone who spoke up. Not just for me, but for the principle that every student's work should be judged fairly, without prejudice. Her tone was measured, deliberate. This wasn't just about a math test. It was about the assumptions we carry into classrooms. It was about the quiet ways bias can strip opportunities before a student even knows they're in danger. She paused, letting the words settle. I was lucky. I had proof. I had a stage. Most students don't get that. That's why change has to happen, not just here but everywhere. Cameras clicked. Pens scratched against notepads. I also want to speak to the students who've been doubted, dismissed, or told they don't belong, she continued. Your work has value. Your voice has value. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Her eyes moved across the crowd, landing briefly on the rows of younger students pressed against the rope line. Some were recording her. Others just stared. Why? She closed with a promise. This isn't the end of the conversation. It's the start of one. Questions erupted as she stepped back, but the sound of cheers quickly overtook them. Within hours, clips of her speech dominated social media. Headlines read, "Student accused of cheating speaks on bias and brilliance." College recruiters reached out through her email. The National STEM Foundation offered to sponsor her next competition. Asha saw it all, but she didn't linger on the offers. For her, the win wasn't in the attention, it was in the shift she felt ripple outward, the sense that a door had been opened for more than just herself. The independent investigation began quietly, with a team of outside auditors requesting stacks of records from the district. At first it seemed routine. Emails, grade reports, enrollment data. But as weeks passed, patterns began to emerge. The auditors found that students from certain backgrounds were consistently placed in lower-level classes, even when their test scores qualified them for advanced ones. Instructors were far more likely to question high-achieving work from those same students, sometimes launching reviews over minor discrepancies while overlooking similar issues from others. Grading records told another story. Essays and projects from marginalized students were marked down at disproportionate rates. Recommendation letters for scholarships and competitions were not only fewer but also less enthusiastic in tone. When the investigators interviewed alumni, their accounts mirrored the data. One recalled being told to focus on realistic goals after expressing interest in engineering. Another said their AP test scores were flagged for verification 2 years in a row, despite never being found guilty of wrongdoing. The picture was clear. Asha's case wasn't an outlier. It was the latest in a long chain of inequities, one that had simply been brought into the public eye. When the findings were delivered to the board, the language was blunt. Systemic disparities exist within the district's academic processes, and corrective measures are urgently required. For students still in the system, the report was both validation and fuel. The quiet complaints whispered in hallways now had the weight of proof behind them. And for the district, there was no longer a choice between action and inaction. The evidence demanded change. The district called a press conference on a bright Thursday morning. The superintendent stepped up to the podium, flanked by the school board members who had sat stone-faced through the earlier meetings. Today, she began, we are announcing a series of reforms to ensure fairness, equity, and transparency in our schools. The first change, mandatory annual bias training for all faculty and staff, designed to address both overt and unconscious discrimination. Excellence should never be doubted, because of who a student is, she said. Second, a new transparent grading review system. Any student whose work was questioned would be given clear, documented reasons and the right to an independent reevaluation. No more shadow investigations without the student's knowledge. Third, the creation of student advocacy panels, groups of trained peers and faculty who could intervene if a student felt they were being treated unfairly. And then came the final announcement. We are establishing the Asha Daniels Scholarship, awarded annually to underrepresented students excelling in STEM fields. This scholarship will be funded jointly by the district and community partners. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras zoomed in on Asha, seated in the front row beside her parents. She kept her expression calm, but her mother's eyes glistened. The superintendent concluded, we cannot undo the harm done, but we can ensure no student endures the same experience again. Within hours, national media picked up the story. Headlines read, Students Fight Sparks District-Wide Reform. Editorials praised the scope of the changes while noting how rare it was for institutions to act so quickly under public pressure. Social media lit up with the news of the scholarship. Former students posted messages of pride and relief. Younger ones tagged friends, saying, "This could be us." For Asha, the reforms were more than symbolic. They were tangible proof that quiet persistence could move entire systems. And though she knew the work wasn't finished, she also knew something had shifted for her school, for her community, and for every student who would walk through those doors after her. The announcement came in the form of a short email to faculty, students and parents. Effective immediately, Mr. Daniel Whitmore has tendered his resignation from his position as AP Mathematics instructor. There was no meeting, no farewell gathering, just a single paragraph attached to a scanned letter. In it, Whitmore wrote, "I regret how events unfolded and the disruption they caused to our school community. I remain committed to the principles of academic integrity and wish my students the best in their future endeavors." He never mentioned Asha by name. He never said he was wrong. For some it was an unsatisfying end, but for others it was enough. The class schedule was quietly reassigned, and students began filing into the new teacher's room without comment. In the halls, Whitmore's name faded from whispered conversation. The once heavy air around the math wing lifted, replaced by a hum of normalcy. Life at the school moved forward, and without him, it felt lighter. It was a gray morning in late spring when the envelope arrived. A thick, cream-colored packet with her name in bold letters across the front. Asha sat at the kitchen table, her parents on either side, and slid her finger under the seal. The first page bore the crest of her dream university. "Congratulations," the words seemed to glow on the page. "Full scholarship. Admission to the honors program." A personal note from the dean, welcoming her to their STEM research initiative. Later that day, on her way to the library, she passed the math wing. Her steps slowed at the doorway to the room where it had all begun. The desks were neatly arranged. The board was clean, empty, but not hollow. Just a space that had moved on, like she stood there for a moment, her hand resting lightly on the doorframe. A faint smile crossed her face, not of triumph but of quiet acknowledgement. Then she turned and kept walking, her steps steady and unhurried, carrying her toward whatever came next. The ballroom was packed, rows of folding chairs stretching to the back wall, banners from youth organizations hanging above the stage. Asha stood at the podium, a single spotlight catching the edge of her blazer. She took a breath, letting the chatter die down. "I'm here today," she began, "not to tell a story about revenge, but about preparation and what it means to stand your ground when the ground beneath you is being pulled away." She told them about the exam, the accusations, the hallway whispers. She described the retest not as a trap, but as an opportunity she decided to own. Her tone stayed measured, her pace deliberate, drawing the audience in. "I didn't raise my voice," she said. "Not because I wasn't angry, but because I wanted the truth to be louder than my temper." The room was silent, every ear tuned to her words. She spoke of integrity, how it's tested most when people have already decided who they think you are. "Preparation doesn't just happen in the weeks before a test," she said. "It's in every late night, every page of notes, every time you push past the voice that says you don't belong." As she finished, she looked over the crowd of young faces. "Whatever stage you stand on, whatever system you're up against, don't shrink to fit someone else's idea of your worth. Stand your full height." The applause started in one corner, then swept through the room, rising to a standing ovation. Asha stepped back from the podium, not smiling wide, but with the same quiet steadiness that had carried her through the storm. Months later, the video of Asha's retest was still circulating, now as part of presentations in classrooms, training sessions, and conferences on equity and education. Teachers used it to spark conversations about bias. Students watched it and saw themselves in her calm defiance. At one school, a ninth grader said, "If she can do that, maybe I can join the robotics team." At another, a senior decided to apply for an AP course they'd been told was too advanced. The hashtags had faded, but the story's imprint remained. In her own life, Asha was packing for college. Textbooks lined her desk, alongside a stack of letters from people she'd never met, students, parents, teachers, thanking her for showing them another way to stand up. One evening, she sat by her window, watching the campus map of her soon-to-be university glow on her laptop screen. She thought about everything that had happened. The accusation, the retest, the changes that rippled far beyond her school. It struck her that the real victory wasn't just in proving she'd been right. It was in proving what was possible when you refused to be diminished. Sometimes the loudest statement isn't a shout or a slam of the door. Sometimes it's the steady hand, the measured step, the voice that speaks only when it's ready, and leaves the rest in the silence it creates. That was the lesson she carried forward, and she knew it was one she'd spend her life passing on.